Arab executive took his girlfriend to dinner, but then saw his pregnant African ex-wife working there. He thought he had left his past behind, moved on to a life of luxury, success, and a stunning new girlfriend by his side. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw that night. As they walked into the most prestigious restaurant in Dubai, his heart nearly stopped. There she was, his African ex-wife, visibly pregnant, wearing a waitress uniform and struggling to hide her exhaustion. What happened next left the entire restaurant silent, and by the end of that night, his life would never be the same again. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring and powerful stories like this to you. That night, the air inside Al Noor, one of Dubai's most exclusive restaurants, was thick with the scent of saffron and rosewater. Elegant chandeliers glittered overhead as the wealthy and powerful dined beneath them. Rami Al Farouk, a 42-year-old Arab executive known for his sharp business acumen and even sharper suits, entered confidently, his arm wrapped around the slender waist of his new girlfriend, Layla. She was everything the tabloids adored, young, radiant, and from a well-known family in Abu Dhabi. As they were led to their private table, Rami's gaze wandered, more out of habit than curiosity. But then something, or rather someone, stopped him cold. Across the room, balancing a tray with trembling hands, was Amara, his ex-wife, the woman he had once loved so fiercely, and left behind when ambition clouded his heart. She hadn't seen him yet. Her once vibrant face looked tired, her movements slow, and her belly, there was no mistaking it. She was heavily pregnant. Rami's chest tightened painfully. His mind raced. How is she here? Why is she working like this? And pregnant? Layla leaned in closer, her voice dripping with sweet naivety. Rami, darling, is everything all right? You look pale. He quickly forced a smile. It's nothing, just the lighting in here. But his mind was anything but calm. Amara had always been a proud woman. He remembered how she used to walk beside him with confidence, refusing to be overshadowed by his wealth or status. She was the reason he'd once believed in simpler things: humility, kindness, real connection. But their marriage had ended in a storm of misunderstandings, harsh words, and ultimately, his own pride. And now, here she was, wearing a faded uniform that didn't quite fit over her swollen belly, serving people who wouldn't even meet her eyes. As Amara approached a nearby table, she suddenly faltered. One hand flew to her stomach, the other gripping the edge of the chair. Rami shot to his feet before he even realized what he was doing. "Amara!" he called out, his voice cutting through the soft music and polite conversation like a knife. Heads turned. Conversations fell silent. Amara's eyes met his, wide and filled with shock, and something else. Pain. In that frozen moment, Rami felt the weight of every mistake he'd ever made. Layla looked between them, confusion written all over her flawless features. Rami, who is she? But Rami wasn't listening. He crossed the distance to Amara in seconds, his hand gently taking her arm to steady her. "Why are you doing this?" he asked in a low voice, his throat tight. "Why are you working in this condition?" Tears welled in Amara's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "Because I have no choice, Rami. Life doesn't slow down just because you're tired. Some of us don't have the luxury of falling apart." Her words hit harder than any slap could have. He wanted to ask the question burning in his mind, "Is the child mine?" But fear and guilt held his tongue. Just then, Amara's manager stormed over, his face red with irritation. "Miss Amara, what's going on here? Get back to work or—" Rami turned, his full stature and commanding presence making the man instantly shrink back. "She's done working tonight, and you will treat her with the respect she deserves. Send someone to bring her things. She's leaving, now." Without waiting for a response, Rami turned to Amara. His voice softened. "You're coming with me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "You don't have to do this, Rami. I can handle it." But for the first time in years, Rami wasn't thinking about pride or appearances. He wasn't thinking about the business meetings or the glamorous girlfriend still sitting confused at their table. He was thinking about the woman standing in front of him, the woman he had wronged, and the life she was carrying. And in that moment, he made a silent promise. "Whatever happens next, I won't turn my back again." The drive back to Rami's penthouse was tense and silent. Amara sat quietly in the passenger seat of his sleek black Mercedes, her hands gently resting on her swollen belly. Outside, the lights of Dubai glittered against the night sky, a cruel reminder of the wealth and comfort that had always seemed just out of reach for her after their separation. Rami gripped the steering wheel, his mind a chaotic storm. Every glance at Amara brought back memories he'd tried to bury, nights filled with laughter, long walks by the creek before the towers rose high, her soft singing in their tiny apartment before his ambition demanded a life far bigger than what they had shared. Now that ambition felt hollow. "Are you going to ask?" Amara's voice broke the heavy silence, quiet but steady. Rami glanced at her, his throat tightening. "Ask what?" She turned her head, her dark eyes locked on his. "If the child is yours?" He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is he?" She turned away again, staring out the window. "What difference would it make, Rami? You walked away years ago. You made it clear there was no place for me in your new life." Guilt twisted in his chest. She was right. He had chosen status over substance, leaving behind the only person who had loved him before the wealth, before the title, before the endless boardroom victories. "Amara, please, just tell me." She drew a shaky breath, her fingers tightening over her stomach. "Yes," she said softly. "He's yours." The words hit him like a crashing wave. His mind reeled with the weight of it. He was going to be a father, and he had almost missed it entirely. The rest of the drive was a blur. When they arrived at his penthouse, Amara hesitated at the entrance. The tall glass doors and marble floors stood in stark contrast to the worn-out shoes on her feet and the faded dress barely stretching over her belly. "I don't belong here, Rami," she said quietly. But before she could turn away, he stepped forward, his voice firm. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Amara. And right now, you're here. Please, let me at least offer you comfort for tonight." Reluctantly, she followed him inside. The penthouse was everything you'd expect from one of Dubai's top executives. Sleek modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Burj Khalifa. Rare art pieces worth more than most people made in a lifetime. But for the first time, Rami looked around and felt none of the pride he usually did. Instead, it all seemed painfully empty. "I'll arrange a guest room," he said, but Amara shook her head. "I'm not staying, Rami. I needed a ride home, that's all." He moved closer, his eyes filled with regret. "Amara, please. You're exhausted. You're carrying my child. At least let me make sure you're safe and comfortable tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure everything out." Her lips trembled, and for a moment, he saw the fierce, proud woman he had loved, fighting to stay strong even when the world pressed her down. "Just for tonight," she whispered. Rami gently took her hand and led her to the master bedroom, refusing to let her sleep in a guest room like a stranger. He brought her water, fresh clothes from one of his luxury brand contacts, anything to offer her the dignity she deserved. Later that night, as Amara lay resting, Rami stood at the window, looking out over the glowing city. His mind wouldn't stop racing. How had he become this man? Someone so consumed by power and wealth that he forgot the simple, most important things. Tomorrow, the world would expect him back in the boardrooms, closing billion-dollar deals, shaking hands with princes and CEOs. But for the first time, he didn't care about any of that. Tomorrow, his only mission would be to make things right, no matter what it took. Morning sunlight poured through the penthouse windows, casting a golden hue over the immaculate space. Rami had barely slept, pacing the living room most of the night, lost in thought. His mind replayed every moment of his relationship with Amara, how it started with a simple coffee, shared at a roadside cafe, how she had once dreamed of opening a small school back in her hometown, and how his hunger for power had slowly pulled them apart. He stood outside the bedroom door for a moment, hand raised to knock, but hesitating. When he finally pushed the door open gently, he found Amara sitting by the window, cradling her belly, staring out at the city skyline. She looked so peaceful and yet impossibly distant, as if part of her had already prepared to leave. "You should be resting," he said softly. She turned to him, her eyes tired but calm. I've done enough resting, Rami. I have to face reality. There's a life growing inside me. I have no time to waste. He stepped into the room, his heart heavy. Let me help, Amara. Please. Whatever you need. Her lips curved into a faint, almost bitter smile. You say that now. But what happens when your reputation is at stake? When the world starts asking why Rami al-Farouq's child will be born to a woman they consider beneath him? That's not who I am anymore, he insisted, stepping closer. I won't make the same mistakes again. She raised an eyebrow. You mean the mistakes where you left me standing alone in a crowded room, pretending you didn't know me? Or the ones where you sat at lavish dinners and introduced your new life to everyone, while I packed my bags in silence? Rami clenched his jaw. Every word cut deep, but he knew she was right to say them. I can't change the past, Amara, but I can change what happens next, he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Let me take you to your doctor's appointment today. Let me be there. Her gaze softened slightly. You remember? He nodded. Every detail. You never missed a checkup, even when you were tired or working long shifts. I know you have one today. She stood carefully, placing a hand on her lower back. Fine, but this doesn't change anything, Rami. I'm not asking for your charity. It's not charity, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. It's responsibility, and maybe a second chance, if you'll let me earn it. The ride to the clinic was quiet again, but this time, the silence wasn't cold. It was thoughtful, cautious. When they arrived, Rami insisted on walking with her inside, ignoring the stares from others who recognized him immediately. He sat beside her in the waiting room, his fingers tapping nervously against his knee. Are you nervous? She asked, a small smirk playing on her lips despite herself. He let out a breathless laugh. I've closed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, Amara. But sitting here, waiting to know my child is healthy, I've never been this terrified. Her smile faded as she reached over and placed her hand over his. Me too, she admitted. That simple touch, after all the walls and years between them, felt like the first drop of rain after a long drought. When the doctor finally called them in, Rami stood and offered his arm. Amara hesitated only a moment before taking it. Inside the examination room, as the sound of their baby's heartbeat echoed through the speakers, Rami's eyes welled with tears he couldn't hold back. For the first time, the reality of it all settled in. He was about to become a father, and for the first time in years, he knew exactly what mattered. As they left the clinic, Rami turned to her, his voice low, but full of conviction. Come back with me, not just for tonight. Stay. Let me be there for you, for our child. No more running, no more distance. Amara looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Rami, I don't know if I can trust you with my heart again. Then trust me with his, he said, gently placing his hand on her stomach. Let me start there. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Amara stood on the penthouse balcony. The gentle breeze played with her hair, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to simply breathe. Behind her, the sound of soft music drifted through the open doors, an old song she once loved but hadn't heard since leaving Rami's life. Inside, Rami paced the living room, phone in hand, cancelling meetings and pushing back a critical board presentation. His advisors were baffled. The great Rami al-Farouk didn't miss meetings, and certainly not for personal matters. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. He needed to make this right. Walking onto the balcony, he approached Amara carefully, afraid that any wrong word would shatter the fragile peace between them. "You're quiet," he said gently. Amara didn't turn to him, her gaze lost in the endless city lights. "It's the first time I've felt safe in months." Those words hit him harder than any accusation. "You'll never have to feel unsafe again," he promised. She turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You make promises easily, Rami. You always have. But do you even know what that means?" "I'm learning," he admitted. "And I know words mean nothing without actions. Let me prove it." Amara studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "I have to find a place to stay, somewhere decent before the baby comes. I won't raise him in charity, even yours." Rami stepped closer. "Then let me help you find it. But until then, stay here. You're not a guest. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." "And what about her?" Amara asked quietly. Rami stiffened. "Who?" "Your girlfriend," she said, finally facing him fully. "The one you walked in with last night, parading through that restaurant like a trophy. Does she know I'm here? That I'm carrying your child?" Rami ran a hand through his hair, his face tight with regret. "I ended things with Layla this afternoon. I told her the truth. About you. About everything. She deserved honesty." Amara's eyes searched his, skeptical but curious. "You really think this is something you can just fix overnight?" He shook his head. "I don't expect forgiveness, Amara, but I can't stand on the sidelines anymore. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll be here. For you, for him." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let her emotions make decisions for her. "You say that now, Rami, but what happens when this gets inconvenient? When the headlines start asking questions about the perfect executive who abandoned his ex-wife and unborn child?" "Then let them ask," he said firmly. "Let them write whatever they want. I'm done living for them. My future is standing right here in front of me." A long silence stretched between them before Amara finally turned away, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. I don't have the strength to hope again, Rami. Not unless you show me something real." He took a deep breath, his decision already made. "Tomorrow morning, I'm resigning from the board." Amara's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "I'm stepping down. I've spent years building a life around status and money. And for what? To end up alone in this glass tower? I'm done chasing things that don't matter." "Rami, that's your entire life," she whispered. He shook his head. "It was my life. But my life is changing now. And nothing is more important than being a father to my child and making amends to the only woman I've ever truly loved." Tears spilled over her cheeks, her defenses cracking under the weight of his words. For the first time, she saw not the ruthless executive she once knew, but the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. And for the first time, she didn't pull away when he stepped forward and gently took her hands in his. "Let me be the man you believed I could be, Amara," he whispered. "Please." Her fingers tightened around his, her voice barely audible through her tears. "Don't break my heart again, Rami, because this time I won't survive it." The following morning, the penthouse was filled with a quiet tension. Rami stood before the tall windows overlooking the city, already dressed in a sharp suit. But this time, it wasn't for a board meeting. Today was different. Today, he was stepping away from the very life he had spent decades building. Behind him, Amara walked softly into the living room, her delicate steps barely audible. She wore one of the flowing silk dresses he had provided, her baby bump now impossible to ignore. She carried herself with grace, despite the uncertainty still lingering between them. "You're really going through with it?" she asked quietly. Rami turned to face her, his expression resolute. "Yes. I've called an emergency board meeting. In less than an hour, I'll resign." Amara crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes full of doubt. "And then what, Rami? Do you think stepping down magically fixes everything you've broken?" He approached her slowly, his voice calm but unwavering. "No, it doesn't. But it's a start. I'm not just stepping down from the company. I'm stepping away from the man I became, the one who cared more about image than people." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. For once, there was none. "And after that?" she asked, her voice soft but weighted. "What happens when you're no longer the powerful Rami al-Farouk? When the world stops returning your calls, when the spotlight fades?" Rami's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then I'll finally have time for what matters, for this child, for you, if you'll let me." Tears welled in Amara's eyes again, but she turned away before they could fall. "We'll see, Rami. Words aren't enough anymore." Without another word, he grabbed his keys and left. Inside the grand conference room of Al-Farouk Enterprises, the air was thick with tension. Powerful men and women filled the long table, their faces lined with confusion and irritation. When Rami walked in, every conversation fell silent. He stood at the head of the table, his shoulders squared, his expression calm. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "I won't waste your time. I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the senior board members, a man named Khalid Mansour, stood abruptly. "This is absurd, Rami," Khalid snapped. "You built this empire. You can't just walk away." "I'm not walking away," Rami corrected. "I'm walking toward something more important. I've spent too many years sacrificing the people I love for this title. That ends today." Another board member scoffed. "Is this about that woman we saw you with last night? You're throwing everything away. For her?" Rami's jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the room, filled with people who couldn't understand because they had never experienced real love, real loss. "This isn't about anyone else," he said firmly. "It's about me becoming the man I should have been all along. And that man isn't defined by boardrooms or balance sheets." Silence fell over the room again. No one knew what to say. Without waiting for their approval, Rami placed the signed resignation papers on the table and walked out, his head held high. Back at the penthouse, Amara sat in the nursery, the room he had prepared overnight without even telling her. The space was painted in soft, calming colors, with plush toys neatly arranged and a crib already assembled by the window. She ran her fingers over the smooth wooden frame of the crib, her thoughts spinning. Could she believe him this time? Could she risk her heart all over again? Just then, the door creaked open, and Rami appeared. A quiet exhaustion on his face, but also a peace she hadn't seen in years. "It's done," he said simply. Amara stood slowly, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. "And now?" He stepped closer, his voice low and earnest. "Now, I spend every day proving to you that I'm not that man anymore, that I'm worthy of being a father, and if you'll ever let me, worthy of being yours again." Her tears finally broke free, and before she could stop herself, she fell into his arms. "I don't know if I can trust you completely," she whispered against his chest. "Then just trust me with this moment," he replied softly, his arms wrapping around her and their unborn child. "And let me earn everyone after." Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to find a new rhythm. Rami kept his promise. He was present for every doctor's appointment, every quiet evening walk when Amara's back ached, and every late night when fear crept into her thoughts. The powerful executive was gone. In his place stood a man who spent his mornings preparing breakfast for Amara, who read parenting books late into the night, and who held her hand gently whenever doubt flickered across her face. Amara, too, found herself changing. At first, she resisted his kindness, waiting for the old Rami to resurface, the one who had once chosen power over love. But day after day, he remained patient, present, and more genuine than she had ever known him to be. One quiet afternoon, as a soft rain tapped against the windows, Amara sat curled on the couch, her feet resting on a small pillow. Rami knelt in front of her, gently massaging her swollen ankles. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. He looked up at her, his brow furrowed. "Miss what?" "The power, the meetings, being the man everyone chased after." He shook his head slowly, his hand resting over her ankle. "No. I spent years being chased by people who didn't even know me. Now, for the first time, I'm right where I want to be, and for once, I'm not running from anything." Amara bit her lip, her eyes glistening. "You've really changed." Rami smiled softly. "I didn't change overnight, Amara. You just reminded me who I used to be, before I lost myself." Before she could respond, a sharp pain crossed her face. She gasped and clutched her belly. "Rami, I think it's time." His eyes widened in panic before he quickly gathered himself. He grabbed her hospital bag, helped her carefully to her feet, and within minutes, they were on their way to the hospital. The hours that followed were long and exhausting, but Rami never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction, whispered words of encouragement when she felt like giving up, and kissed her forehead as she fought through the pain. Then, at dawn, a soft cry filled the room. Rami stood frozen as the nurse placed their newborn son in Amara's arms. Tears streamed down his face as he leaned closer, brushing his fingers gently across the baby's tiny hand. "He's perfect," Rami whispered. Amara looked up at him, her eyes full of exhaustion and joy. "And so is this moment," she replied. Rami kissed her forehead, his heart fuller than it had ever been. And in that quiet hospital room, he knew this was the life he had been searching for all along.